trabaho ng committee.
May I request the Honorable MP Sheikh Ibrahim Ali to lead the invocation. Sheikh Ibrahim Ali.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki yaumiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdinas siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladzina an'amta 'alaihim ghairil maghdubi 'alaihim waladdallin. Amin. Allahumma waffiqna ya Allah lima tuhibbu wa tarda. Allahumma balligh muradana ya Allah ya Rahman ya Rahim ya Arhamar Rahimin. Kama ballagta ala muradi nabika Muhammadin sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma aslih lana dinana alladhi huwa ismatu amrina wa aslih lana dunyana allati fiha ma'ashuna wa aslih lana akhiratana allati ilaiha maduna ya Allah. Allahumma inna nas'aluka al-jannah wa ma yuqarribuna min qawlina wa fi'lina wa amalin wa na'udzubika min nar wa ma yuqarribuna ilaiha min qawlina wa fi'lina wa amalin ya Allah. Allahumma fi qulata umurina ya Allah. Allahumma rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina adzaban nar. Sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Please remain standing for the singing of the national anthem to be followed by the Bangsamoro hymn.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Kayang magiliw, kaya sa sinangalan, alam ng puso, sa likid mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, kuya ka ng magiting, sa mandulupin, di ka pasisigil, sa nagatang tubok sa simoy at sa langit mong bagaw, ay hinatang tuglang awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang isang ng matawad mo'y tagumpay na nag-iingin, ang bituin at alam niya kailan pa may di matitingin. Lumalang araw ng walang pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang hindi kaya na pagkay mga amin, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo. Simula noon hanggang ngayon, isa ang naging layon. Magkaisaan magpuklod, kalitingan ay marugtong. Tumayo tayo mula sa hamon ng nakaraan, niyabos ang panganib na umanlang. Tinangako sa puso at paniniwala, ang ginhawa para sa kabataan. Bangsamoro ay tayo.
Review, the Secretary General, directed to for the role
Sino po ako makay?
Marcia.
Explain mo, tingnan.
Right.
O sasabihin nga niya, mga hilsiya?
The Honorable Abbas Ahmad,
Present.
Abbas Harold. Abbas Ganaim,
Camera mo, okay na?
Abbas Basit Gares,
Hold mo, okay na?
Abu Mujib,
Present.
Yung Adjau Rahman Alonte. Present. Ahang Abdullah. Alamia Liza.
Present.
Alauddin Faiz. Ali Ibrahim. Ali Lanang Jr. Ali Edi Makar. Alir Cesar.
Present.
Muluto Suat. Anayat Susana.
Present.
Asmaul Muslimah. Balitong Aling Pangalian. Para Hamid Aminuddin. Rasman Anna Tarhata.
Present.
Ako Muhammad Zainuddin.
Present.
Burahan Abraham.
Present.
Kandao Bay Maleha.
Present.
Dandamon Latif Maysara.
Present.
Diamla Musa. Ipatuan sa Pula.
Present. Assalamualaikum.
Ibrahim Haud. Ismail Haji Abdul Hafiz. Gayak Abdullah.
Present.
Kera Edward. Hasim Abdullah.
Present.
Hasan Hatimin. Iqbal Muakhir. Ismail Rasul. Jazuri Raisa. Jakilan Muslimin. Bainon.
Present.
Lidasan Mussolini.
Present po. Here.
Loong Dom Mustafa. Morena Jose Ribani. Bertakwa Agutao. Makapaar Abdullah. Makaraya Jamil. Makasalong Marjani. Panguna Dato Kadafe. Mantawil Malik. Mastura Dato Tukaw. Mastura Siti Sahara.
Present.
Mawalil Amil Bahar. Imbang Dato Minpantaw. Og Rasul. Mujahid Abdul Muhnin.
Present. Panguda Dato. Present.
Munoz Hussein.
Dato. Present.
Yes, sir. Ranong Sohaib.
Present.
Pakasang Kupaida.
Type na present.
Pak Abdul Wahab. Pangandama
Present.
Ramos. Rimban
Present. Ramos.
Zakar Modayaw. Sahrin Abdul. Talekad Sali Al-Shaykh.
Present. Present.
Romeo. Sali Kali. Tangki Ali. Sani Punduma. Satar Alzad. Tema Omar Yasser. Tema Romeo. Silongan Aida. Sulaiman Ali. Pago Paisalin.
Yung okay lang.
Tan Nabil.
Present.
Lucia Sahi. Ulama Melanio. Usman Akbar. Jacob Muhammad. UAK Narciso.
Mike. Mr. Speaker, on the basis of the roll call, out of the 80 members of the BTF Parliament, 21 physically responded to the call and 35 participating virtually. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we have a total of 56 attendees, both physical and virtual. We therefore certify, Mr. Speaker, there is presence of quorum. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
With the certification of the Secretary General as to the existence of a quorum, I now call this session to order. Majority Floor Leader.
Honorable Speaker Aldo, honorable members of the Bangsamoro Authority,
Pwede nakasalita lang ang makita.
friends, visitors, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are now on item number 6, reading and approval of journal of the previous session. Number 31 of February 2026. This journal has been distributed to the members of the meeting. Mr. Speaker, I move dispense with the reading of the journal of the previous session, and I further move for the approval of the same.
There is a move to dispense with the reading of the journal of the previous session. For the approval of the same has been seconded. There being no objection, the motion is hereby approved. Majority Floor Leader.
Yes, we proceed to the resolution, Mr. Speaker, on item number 7. We may request the Secretary General to read the first proposed resolution titled the number.
The Secretary General is directed to read the first proposed resolution.
Mr. Speaker, on item number 7, proposed resolution, we have proposed resolution number 273, entitled Resolution Operationalizing Barter Trade in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, adopting in parts some provisions of Executive Order number 64, series of 2018, which provides for the revival of the barter in Mindanao and other pertinent laws, policies, and guidelines, creating for the purpose an ad hoc committee to amend, modify, revise, and review some pertinent provisions thereof pursuant to Section 26 of Article 13 and Section 2, Article 5 of Republic Act 11054, otherwise known as the Bangsamoro Organic Law, and Section 8 of Executive Order number 64, authored by Honorable MP Ali Bisanki, co-authors Honorable MP Mujib Abu and Honorable MP Abdullah Ahad. Mr. Speaker.
Majority Floor Leader,
Yes,
what is
Mr.
your
Speaker,
pleasure?
I move to refer this proposed resolution to Committee on Trade, Investment, and Tourism, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any second? Seconded? There being proposed resolution number 273 is referred to the Committee on Trade, Investment, and Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, may we request the Secretary General to read the next proposed resolution, Mr. Speaker.
The Secretary General is directed to read the second proposed resolution.
Mr. Speaker, second proposed resolution number 274 entitled Resolution Providing for the Accreditations of Halal Business Council Mindanao as Strategic Partner and Corporate Arm of the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Agrarian Reform and or Ministry of Trade, Investment and Tourism on halal development and promotion. Authored Honorable MP Ali Bisanki, co-authors MP Mujib Abu and MP Abdullah Ahang. Mr. Speaker.
Majority Floor Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I move to refer this proposed resolution to Committee on Agriculture, Fishery and Agrarian Reform and Committee on Trade, Investment and Tourism, Mr. Speaker.
Second.
Proposed resolution number 274 is hereby transferred to the Committee on Agriculture and Trade, Investment and Tourism. Majority Floor Leader.
Yes, may we request the Secretary General to read the next proposed resolution.
The Secretary General, please read the next proposed resolution.
Third proposed resolution, Mr. Speaker, is proposed resolution number 288 entitled A Resolution Recognizing the Top-Ranked Bangsamoro Quran Reciters who represented the country in various international Quran reciting competitions for around half century since 1969. Authored by Honorable MP A.D. Mapag Ali. Co-authors, the Honorables, Deputy Chief Minister Abdul Sahrin, Deputy Speaker Hatimil Hassan, MP Abdurrauf Makakwa, MP Liza Alamia, MP Diamila Ramos, MP Maysara Landamon Latip, MP Nabila Margarita Pangandaman, MP Nabil Tan, MP Mujib Abu, MP Amil Bahar Mawalim, MP Ali Di Ibrahim, MP Al-Shade Sali, MP Azfar Usman, MP Abraham Burhan, MP Ziaur Rahman Adyong, MP Al-Sad Satar, MP Sahi Uja, and MP Abdul Muhmin Mujahid. Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I move to treat this as simple resolution and be transferred to the business for the day, Mr. Speaker.
Proposed resolution number 288 is transferred to business for.
May we request the Secretary to read the next proposed resolution.
Secretary General, please read the next proposed resolution.
The Speaker, next proposed resolution is proposed resolution number 295 entitled Resolution Directing the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Agrarian Reform to adopt programs that will establish a link between the farmers and purchasers with the end view of improving the farmers' sales. Authored by Honorable MP Attorney Maysara Pudya Dandamon Latip. Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I move to refer this to Committee on Agriculture, Fisheries and Agrarian Reform, Mr. Speaker.
Proposed resolution number 295 is hereby transferred to the referred to the Committee on Agriculture.
May we request the Secretary General to read the next
The
proposed
Secretary
resolution.
General, please read the next proposed resolution.
Mr. Speaker, on proposed resolution number 296 is entitled Resolution Directing the Ministry of Basic and Higher Technical Education to include its program the establishment of special education centers for children who need special education. Authored by Honorable MP Attorney Maysara Pudya Dandamon Latif. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I move to refer this on Committee on Basic, Higher and Technical Education.
Proposed resolution number 296 is referred to the Committee on Basic, Higher and Technical Education.
Mr. Speaker, may we request the Secretary General to read the next proposed resolution.
The Secretary General, please read the next proposed resolution.
Mr. Speaker, next proposed resolution is proposed resolution number 305 entitled A Resolution Expressing Profound Gratitude to the City Government of Cagayan de Oro City and the University of Science and Technology of Southern Philippines for temporarily accommodating the Bangsamoro LSI bound for Basilan, Sulu, and Tawi-Tawi last July 7, 2020. Authored by the Honorables MP Ziaur Rahman Alonto Adyong, Parliament Speaker Ali Pangalian Balindong, Deputy Speaker Hatimili Asan, MP Attorney Raisa Jajuri, MP Abdurrauf Makakwa, MP Amir Bahar Esmawalil, MP Attorney Lanang T. Ali Jr., MP ED Ali Mapag, MP Engineer Aida M. Silungan, MP Attorney Nabil Eitan, MP Attorney Jose Lorena, MP Attorney Ana Tarhata Basman, MP Attorney Liza Alamia, MP Attorney Rasul Mitmug Jr., MP Engineer Bain Batuan, MP Engineer Don Mustafa Luong, MP Dr. Susana S. Anayatin, MP Musuluyni Lidasan, MP Dato Kadafi Manguda Dato, MP Attorney Maysara Dandamon Latif, MP Nabila Margarita Pangandaman, MP Musa Jamla, and MP Attorney Paisalin Tago. Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I move to treat this as simple resolution and be transferred to the business for the day. Mr. Speaker.
Proposed resolution number 310 is transferred to the
305,
business for the day.
305, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary General,
May we request the Secretary to read the next proposed resolution?
Secretary General, please read the next proposed resolution.
Next proposed resolution is proposed resolution number 310, entitled A Resolution Expressing Profound Gratitude to the City Government of San Juan for responding to the needs of Bangsamoro LSI and ROF within their jurisdiction and facilitating their safe return to their respective communities. Authored by Honorable MP Jao Rahman Alonto Adjong, co-authors MP Dr. Susana Anayatin, MP Amir Bahal Mawalil, MP Attorney Rasul Mitbug Jr., MP Dr. Safrula Dipatuan. Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I move to treat this as simple resolution and be transferred to the business for the day.
Proposed resolution number 310?
Oh, yes, 310. The previous
310.
yes.
A while ago is 305.
305.
310 is proposed resolution number 310 is transferred to the business for the day. The previous resolution is proposed resolution number 305.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, may we request the Secretary General to read the next proposed resolution?
The Secretary General, please read the next proposed resolution.
Mr. Speaker, next proposed resolution number 322, entitled Resolution Calling the Bangsamoro Government to Provide Assistance the Needs of the Different Schools in BARM to support the alternative learning modality and the necessary materials used as tool of learning in this health crisis. Authored by Honorable Nasir Rimbang. Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I move to refer this to Committee on Basic, Higher, and Technical Education.
Second?
Yes, second.
Any second?
Second.
Proposed resolution number 322 is referred to the Committee on Basic, Higher, and Technical Education.
May we request the Secretary General to read the next proposed resolution?
The Secretary General, please read the next proposed resolution.
On the ninth proposed resolution, Mr. Speaker, is proposed resolution number 336, entitled A Resolution Requesting the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, and Agrarian Reform to come up with the appropriate mechanism to increase productivity and ensure the income of corn farmers within BARM. Authored, Honorable MP Romeo C. Saliga. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I move to refer this to the Committee on Agriculture, Fishery, and Agrarian Reform.
Proposed resolution number 336 is referred to the Committee on Agriculture, Fisheries, and Aquatic and Agrarian Reform.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we proceed to the next item. We are on item number 8, per stage of bills. May we request the Secretary General to read the title, the oath, or in the bill number of the first stage of bills, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary General, please read BTA title, author and co-authors, the name of the authors and co-authors of BTA Parliament Bill number 65.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, on the first stage of bills, we have BTA Parliament Bill number 65, entitled An Act Prohibiting Discriminations Against Persons who are declared, confirmed, suspected, probable, and recovered cases of COVID-19, including health workers, other frontliners, service workers, repatriated OFWs, returning OFs, and locally stranded individuals, and providing penalties for violations thereof. Authored by the Honorables MP Attorney Rasul Mitmug Jr., MP City Sahara Mastura, MP Jiao Rahman Alonto Adjong, MP Maleha Handaw, MP Ana Terhata Basman, MP Laisa Alamia, MP Attorney Zuharto M. Ludto, MP Engineer Baintan Adil Ampatuan, MP Amil Bahar Mawalil, MP Rasul Ismail, MP Engineer Duon Mustafa A. Luong. Co-authors are as follows: the Honorables MP Musa Kejamla, MP Maysara Damdamun Latif, MP Punduma Sani, MP Musulini Lidasan, MP Attorney Omar Yasir Sema, MP Narciso Ueki, MP Romeo Saliga, MP Jamil Di Macaraya, MP Diamila Ramos, MP Attorney Jose Lorena, MP Attorney Nabil Eitan, MP Ibrahim Di Ali, MP Aida M. Silungan, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, this is a private member bill. May we request the Secretary General to read the next proposed Parliament bill, Mr. Speaker?
The Secretary General is directed to read a Parliament Bill number 66. Its
Yes, Mr.
authors.
Speaker. PTA Parliament Bill number 66 is entitled An Act Establishing Occupationally Safety and Healthy Standards to All Private Establishment within the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region and Muslim Mindanao and providing penalties for violations thereof. Authored by Honorable MP Romeo Sema. Mr. Speaker.
This is a private member bill, Mr. Speaker. We may request the Secretary General to read the next proposed Parliament bill, Mr. Speaker.
The Secretary General is directed to read the title, the names of the authors and co-authors of BTA Parliament Bill number 69.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, on BTA Parliament Bill number 69 is entitled An Act Creating the Parliamentary Women's Caucus in the Bangsamoro Parliament, providing for its powers, functions, and composition. Authored by Honorable Attorney Liza Masud Alamia. Co-authors are as follows: the Honorables MP Attorney Maysara Dandamun Latif, MP Bainon Caron, MP Engineer Baintan Adil Ampatuan, MP Susana Anayatin, MP Nabila Margarita Pangandaman, MP Engineer Aida Silungan, MP Jamila Ramos, MP City Shahara Mastura, MP Princess Malia Kandao, MP Attorney Rasul Mitmug Jr., MP Amir Bahar Mawalil, MP Engineer Don Mustafa Luong, MP Attorney Suharto Ambulutu, MP Rasul Ismail, MP Attorney Nabil Tan, MP Attorney Jose Lorena, and MP Attorney Paisalin Tago, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we proceed now to the item number 10, committee report number 40. This is in relation to the committee report that was read by MP Romeo Sema, which was recommit to the committee on the issue of the offices on the PNP and other law enforcement agency, that it should be have a consultation with them. So they have their committee report number 40, Mr. Speaker. May we request MP Romeo Sema to read the committee report number 40.
The Honorable Romeo Sema is now recognized.
Yes, thank you, Presiding Chair, to our majority provider. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Labor and Employment has the honor to report back to the BTA Parliament the proposed bill number 36 entitled An Act to Institutionalize Policies for Bangsamoro Overseas Employment and Establishing Standard of Protections and Promotions of the Welfare of Overseas Bangsamoro Workers and their families and other purposes. After the BTA Bill number 36 has been recommitted to the Committee on Labor and Employment for its further deliberation, the committee then conducted a committee hearing last September 14, 2020. Video conferencing wherein the Bangsamoro communities outside BARM Federation represented by each sectoral representative, Mr. Salman De Ali, and the Bangsamoro Women's Commission represented by MP Bainon G. Caron, also a member of the Committee on Labor and Employment, participated as resource persons in the said committee hearing. During the deliberations of the BTA Bill number 36, position papers were presented by the resource persons. Manifested in the position papers is the warm support for the passage of the BTA Bill number 36 as stated in the position paper of the Becobar Federation. The BTA Bill number 36 will not only secure the overseas Bangsamoro workers, but also would open up the getaway in solving the tribulations besetting the overseas Philippines, particularly in Muslim countries where 50% of their world population are concentrated. Further, our Federation through its sectoral stated that said bill will be an opportunity for the Philippine government to harness the Bangsamoro potentials in mitigating abuses and securing strong diplomatic and cultural fraternity with the Muslim countries host to millions of OFWs in this stressful situation. Bangsamoro Women Commission, Commissioner and Member of the Parliament, Bainon C. Caron, emphasized in her position paper her warm support to the bill as well and her support. She posited three recommendations to wit. One, a separate provision addressing the needs and concerns of the Bangsamoro women, OFWs, and their families before, during, and after deployment. Discourage, if not prohibit, in the legislation the deployment of married women bar mothers and safety measures ensuring the Bangsamoro government keep tracks of the whereabouts, status, and conditions of all OFWs should be provided in the legislation. Moreover, the Kaagapay Overseas Filipino Workers Resource and Service Center Incorporated o Kaagapay, despite their absence during the committee hearing, submitted their position paper, sharing their inputs and points for clarifications on the BTA Bill number 36 as follows. Article 1, Article 3, Section 10, line 55, rights and obligation, and disclose the full terms and conditions of employment in a language most comprehensible to the OFW, and Article 3, Section 19, line 5, the applicant and explain to him her its content and a language most comprehensible to the applicant before signing the document. The Kaagapay believes that the OVW can fully and better understand her employment contract using her mother tongue language, and it is the right of OVW to have a full grasp of her employment contract before signing it. Number two, under Article 3, Section 20, Kaagapay clarified whether there is an established system where the OVW can check the updated license status of the recruitment agency accredited to MOLI. We believe that you have a separate bill on the regulations of the recruitment agencies in BARM. We hope that this concern is included in the said relevant bill. It would be very helpful for the OBWs and for migrants' right advocates like us to have access to this important information. Number three, Article 3, Section 22, line 3, recommending for the deletions of the words or origin countries as stated. They prefer that there will be a complementary mandatory PEDOS in BARM before leaving the country. Integral to this localized PEDOS shall be right-based information where the rights are being promoted in times of their waiting period for deployment. There are cases that OVW's rights are violated by their own recruitment agency while waiting for their deployment in Metro Manila. These cases are not limited to work without pay, no proper sleeping quarters, lack of food ration. In addition, Kaagapay also believe that pedos shall be given among OVWs and a member of their family. Their families need to be part of the informed decision, especially that it is the family who can monitor regularly the conditions of OVWs once they are deployed. Number 4, Article 5, Section 30, line 28, recommends replacing the term helpers with workers. Domestic worker is work. Thus, those who do these works are called workers too. Number 5, Article 5, Section 31, as to clarify whether this program have corresponding fund to support the comprehensive mental health and psychological needs of the OVWs. In the current setup, Kagapay OFW has difficulty in addressing psychological and mental health needs of mentally distressed OFWs, especially when those serious cases due to lack of funding from relevant government agencies. Relevant local government agencies do referrals, which we think are not sufficient for OBWs who need medication for serious mental illness. A comprehensive program for mental health support, we believe, needs to be funded since OBWs can only be successfully reintegrated back to her family and society if she is mentally healthy. Number 6, Article 6, Section 42, open close parenthesis A to Kagapay as to clarify whether OWWB or Overseas Workers Welfare Bureau serve as a counterpart body of the National Labor Relations Commission in BARM. If not, Kagapay highly recommend that OWWB also serves as such or establish a counterpart agency with the labor disputes between OBWs and recruitment agencies are titled within the joint and solidarity liability framework. And number 7, Articles 9, Section 42, close parenthesis D, Kaagapay recommends to include their points to the paragraph that that Bangsamoro local government units may establish functional OVW help desk in their areas of concern, may it be provincial, municipal, city, barangay level, to institutionalize further the policies for the protections and promotions of rights and welfare of OVWs and their families. This is one of our advocacies where labor migration concerns are integrated in the governance framework of government units. Currently, we are piloting Barangay Lamud and Luoy in South Upi and Barangay Rimpis in Upi for the establishment of barangay level or OFW help days. Such establishment will be very beneficial for OVWs and families, especially in islands provinces. Hence, this committee respectfully recommending for approval, respectfully submitting by the Committee on Labor and Employment, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, there are two issues during our period of interpretations that we already parked because of some concerns of the members of the parliament. One is the establishment of the Bangsamoro help desk in the other uh, foreign countries or embassies in different countries, particularly the Muslim countries, Mr. Chair. And second, on the issue on the penalty. So we did not discuss during our period during our committee hearing, Mr. Chair, because the representative of the DFA and the DOJ ay hindi po sila naka-join during that meeting, Mr. Chair. So, but I believe that these two issues we can consider, Mr. Chair. Thank you and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh.
What is now the pleasure of the proponent with respect to the committee report?
Yes, Mr. Chair,
Are you going to move for the adoption of the committee
yes,
report?
Mr. Chair. So, on behalf of the Committee on Labor and Employment, I'd like to move. I humbly request for the host body to approve this committee report, Mr. Chair.
Not approval, but adoption merely.
First
Okay.
adoption, Mr.
Is there any second?
Second.
The same is the committee report is hereby adopted. Majority Floor Leader, what is your pleasure?
Yes, we are now opening the floor for period of debate and interpellation, Mr. Speaker.
1 minute suspension.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Session resume. Majority Floor Leader. Majority Floor Leader, what is the parliamentary status of this bill after the committee report has been adopted?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, if we remember, in answer with that query, Mr. Speaker, if we remember, this bill has been brought in this plenary, in this August body, for committee report, for the approval, hoping for the approval, for the final approval of the bill. However, during the discussion in the plenary, in the period of debate interpellation, this was recommit to conduct further public consultation to include the said government agencies of the national government. So this is now the status of this is to report back on the status of the public consultation and proceed with the period of supposedly to the period of amendment of the particular bill. The report of MP Romeo Sema is to inform this August body whether they conducted a whether or not they conducted a public consultations. As he said a while ago in the committee report number 40, they invited this the concerned government agencies. However, they did not appear or attend on the public consultations. Now, if that will the case, we will proceed to the period of amendment, Mr. Speaker.
May I ask the proponent if a copy of the invitation to the to those invited in the consultations has been properly sent?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Actually,
And how about the reply?
Yes, actually, merong mga verbal some, for example, the DOJ. So, nag-confirm po sila. But during that schedule of the committee hearing, so hindi po sila naka-appear, Mr. Chair. So, that's why hindi po namin na-discuss yung it regards on the Article 6 on penalties. But during our interpretation, Mr. Chair, we this article, the penalties, we emphasize that the Ministry of Labor and Employment, our legal affairs, so hindi po sila yung mag-prosecute sa yung subject sa case na yun. But tayo ay mag-assist lang doon sa ating justice. So
Anyway,
very clear po dito sa ating bill. But yun na, unfortunately, hindi po sila nakadalo, Mr. Chair. So I think parang
they were properly notified.
Mr. Chair?
They were properly notified?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Our secretariat of the committee is properly distributed the invitation, Mr. Chair.
So, Majority Floor Leader, who will move for the opening of the period of amendment?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I move to open the period of amendment.
Mr. Speaker.
The amendment is now open.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes, MP
Mr.
Zia.
Speaker.
MP Zia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a simple question lang po, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I'd like to say that there's indeed an alarming rate of abuses against Filipino workers abroad.
For a while, MP Zia, for a while, this is no longer a period of interpellation. This is already the period of amendment. I will give you a brief opportunity to ask that question.
Thank you. Just one question, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for giving me the allowing me to ask one simple question, Mr. Speaker, to the proponent. Again, I agree with the proponent. This bill has a noble intention to protect essentially our workers, especially those that are coming from the BARM, who are seeking employment abroad. Mr. Speaker, one question lang po. I'd like to ask the proponent, since he also sits in the cabinet, I noticed that the bill is actually, in a way, introduced by the ministry. May I ask the proponent, is this bill supported by the government of the day? or is it even be considered as one of the priority legislation by the government of the day, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, I frankly, as this proposed bill, hindi ko po na-present sa cabinet because during that time, meron tayong, we're allowed that each members of the parliament is allowed to submit a private bill. So I think, so yun po, that's, sorry, so hindi ko po ito na consider na dapat as member of the cabinet. But since I'm as a member of the parliament, so I believe that hindi naman siguro salungat doon sa palisiya, sa rules natin, that each member of the parliament, when a member of the cabinet, ay pwede siya mag-submit ng kaniyang bill, particular sa private bill, Mr. Chair. So hindi po siya naging nagiging urgent bill because of that. So hindi po ako humingi ng certification for urgent bill this one. But I believe, Mr. Chair, because this is part of the 12 points agenda of the Chief Minister, is the priority agenda to protect the workers and to promote employment. So my bill is basically is one of the major mandate of the Ministry of Labor and Employment in accordance to the Republic Act 1105.4 Article on the labor and employment and occupations, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, not a follow-up question, but a manifestation, Mr. Chair, if I may be allowed by the speaker.
Make it very brief.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, the reason why I asked that question is I presume, Mr. Speaker, that the proponent, since he sits in the cabinet, he may as well, but for me, it would be most appropriate to relay this to the leadership, because once we enact this bill, Mr. Speaker, it would constitute allocation for fundings. And so if this requires an allocation of funding, perhaps it would be much better that the cabinet of the government of the day should also support and manifest categorically the endorsing this cabinet bill. As it appears, Mr. Speaker, from the response of the proponent, that this is an independent bill and not of a cabinet bill, Mr. Speaker. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for that privilege, of allowing me to ask question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Attorney.
Order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Attorney MP Nabil Tan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Majority Leader. Point of order ko is yung status ng bill na to. Kasi while tapos na ang interpellation, nag-recommit tayo sa committee for further clarification of issues which are very important, I think. Doon sa DFA at saka doon sa DOJ. And it appears from the report of our brother MP Minister Sema, hindi nakausap ang DOJ, hindi rin yata nakaparticipate ang DFA. So ano nang ginawa? Did we submit the question that the issues to them that we'd like to be clarified by them? Yun ang worry ko. And I also join the observation of MP Zia, that it really, as the author has said, this is necessary for the effective exercise of the functions of the ministry. Then why was it not made a cabinet or government, a bill, cabinet bill. So doon lang ako sa dalawa, sa DOJ, DFA, kasi it's disturbing because there is going to be a death in our embassies. Ako, I support this bill. There's very noble intentions of the bill. Pero yung implementability ng provisions ng law, ng batas, kung magiging batas, baka tayo magka-problema. So, yun lang po, Mr. Speaker.
So,
The proponent is required to answer the questions.
yes,
And
thank you.
before you answer, sorry, Mr. Speaker, ano na uli yung status ng bill na to? Kasi recommitted. Did it open in effect the period of reopen, the period of interpellation, o limited na lang sa issues by which for the reasons that it was recommitted? Mr. Speaker, thank you.
The answer of the majority floor leader a while ago is that the period of interpellation has already been terminated, been
Just for,
recommitted.
Mr. Speaker, for period, just for to satisfy the inquiry of MP Attorney Nabil Tan, is I said a while ago that they submitted, they sent notice, invitation to DFA, DOJ, and other government agencies concerned to attend the public consultation. But the problem is they did not appear or participate in the public consultation when the day come to them to get their side on the particular issue. Hindi po sila dumating doon sa time na pinag-usapan. So wala pong dumating. So the good MP Romeo Sema believe that hindi natin sila pwedeng hintayin forever para hindi tayo maka-proceed dito sa
May I, majority floor leader.
But importante is na bigyan sila ng notice and assign yun na proposed particular bill kung ano ang comment nila doon sa proposed particular bill, MP.
Majority floor leader. The question of Attorney Tan is a valid procedural question. What is stated in the rules is the actual status of this bill in terms of the rules when it is recommitted for further consultations. Ano yung nakasaad sa rules?
One minute suspension.
I believe there is no stated rule for this matter.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes, MP.
1 minute suspension.
Pwede,
1 minute suspension.
pwede pa atang magsalita, no? 1 minute suspension naman. Kanabil, sa RLA po, ang ginagawa po natin sa RLA, pag na-recommit po yung isang proposal, pagbalik sa plenary, ma-assume niya po yung status niya na kailangan ma-open ang debate and interpellation and amendment. Kasi po, ang intention for the yung pag-recommit dun sa batas ay kulang. So that's why...
Dahil kulang nga sa
kulang.
consultation.
So hindi
Session resume. Majority Floor Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we already have a decision on the particular issue, Mr. Speaker, but I move to suspend this session for 15 minutes for as a prayer, Mr. Speaker. We will return after
Session is
10 minutes.
suspended for 15 minutes. So the parliamentary status is we will open up the period of interpellation based on the new committee report. Thank you.
Yes,
to
we yes, we proceed to the period of interpellation and debate on committee report number 40. So the floor is now open for the period of interpellation and debate. May we respectfully first elect MP Joe Lorena to be followed by MP Baintanan Patua, Mr. Speaker.
Is the proponent ready for the period of interpellation?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
MP Attorney Joe Lorena is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Majority Leader. And I thank my good friend, the principal author of this and of this bill and the chairman of the committee that reported back the committee report number 40. If the gentleman would yield to some clarifications.
Okay, please.
Thank you. I heard you mentioned that you sent some communications to the line agency, just to put it on record, to the Department of Foreign Affairs, the OWA, and other agencies. Am I correct?
Yes, MP Attorney Joe.
In this communication, did you include some of the concerns of the member of the parliament when this bill was first brought to the plenary?
Can you repeat your...
In the communication, did you specifically mention also some of the concerns brought by an issue raised by members of the parliament with respect to the departments like DFA, Justice, so forth, so on?
In the...
Just to put it on record.
Yes, Mr.
Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor.
So you also mentioned that despite the communication, not of the agencies appeared to comment on all these comments. Am I correct?
Yes, Honor.
Now, based on that, and you have heard the concerns of the Parliament, did your committee submit or prepared some amendments to the original bill? Are there new provisions incorporated by the committee after this bill has been recommended to your committee?
No, Honor, because during the committee hearing, since the committee, the concerned agencies is hindi po sila naka-attend, hindi po nakadalo, so hindi po namin na-touch yung issue na yun. So I leave into the plenary for the period of amendments.
Thank you.
Your Honor.
One of the concern is our authority to post in the different consulate a Bangsamoro desk. Am I correct?
Yes, Mr.
I think with reference to that, there was mentioned that our desk could not be established in the consulate because we have no jurisdiction over it. Am I correct?
Yes.
Now, from your discussion with the Department of Labor and other agencies, is there a possibility to establish a desk without being in the consulate?
Yes, actually during our technical working committee, the discussions of the transfer of the powers and functions, actually the honorable member of the parliament and also member of the committee on labor, MP Maysara Latif, tinanong po niya sa ating kaibigan na administrator ng POA, si Administrator Olalia po. So na-raise po na issue yun at I'm very happy to inform the host body that during the TWG, Your Honor, is very positive yung kanilang response and I quote the term is ang doable instead of embassy. So mas prepared sila doon sa polo. So yung paglagay ng Bangsamoro desk in the polo, Your Honor. That's so yung po yung kanilang term is doable. So ibig sabihin is pwede tayo and allowed tayo doon sa polo to focus to oversee our overseas workers in the foreign countries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I raise that because from my experience, we usually have welfare attaché in different offices in the polo.
there is a welfare attaché that can be assigned but paid by the Department of Social Welfare. And there is also a polo office. Anyway, again, with that positive information, I would raise the question that I will submit an amendment when we reach to the point, period of amendment, but by saying that the desk will now be established in the polo rather than in the rather than a labor attaché office desk in the embassy.
Yes, Your
So,
Honor.
thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker. That's my query only. Thank you.
Majority Floor
Yes,
Leader.
MP Maintanan Pato, Mr. Speaker. Then to be followed by MP Toy Mangudadato.
MP,
And
the lady
MP
from Maguindanao is
Hey,
recognized.
yuko muna.
Mr. Chair, I would also avail of
Yes,
the
MP Toy
privilege.
Mangudadato.
The gentleman from Maguindanao is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the good proponent of this bill on item number 7 of this committee report, particularly mentioning for the establishment of a OFW help desk. Can the good proponent follow the item 7 on the last paragraph of, last line of paragraph 7 under Article 9, Section 42, quoting the kaagapay of the recommendations to establish a OFW help desk. My concern, Mr. Speaker, is why of all places the kaagapay chose to establish a OFW help desk, which is very far from the places where the most of our OFWs mas madali nilang ma-access. Because as what mentioned in this committee report, particularly they are piloting Barangay Lamud and Barangay Looy in South Upi, as well as Barangay Rampes in Upi. And on the last line, such establishment will be very beneficial for OBWs and families, especially in island provinces. So I do not, sorry if the proponent, can he explain further the relevance of, how do you call this, for the families of the OBWs na pakikinabangan nila, especially in the island provinces, itong help desk center natin, which is located in the very far barangay in the province of Maguindanao, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, first, Mr. Speaker, the proposal, the position paper of the Kagapay. So, mentioning the piloting some areas. Itong specific area, Mr. is based on the data. There is, ito ay doon sa ating mga kapatid na members of the indigenous cultural communities. So ditong mga areas nito. So gusto nila yung ating mga kapatid doon is mabigyan sa madali sa para mapabilis yung monitoring doon sa ating mga areas. Because most of our members of the indigenous cultural communities is nahirapan sila at mag-access din papunta dito sa atin. So that's why yun ang proposal nila. So tinignan din namin yung advantage, yung kanilang position dun sa specific area. But but ito ay ibigay rin namin mamaya sa inyo kung gusto niyo i-expand or the amendment. So and the proponent is open for that, Your Honor.
So therefore, Mr. Speaker, as he mentioned that the proponent is open and amenable to identify other areas other than this identified barangay. O pwede ho ba yun makasuggest tayo? Which I believe, Mr. Speaker, if we could identify a more strategic place and more beneficial for the benefits of our OBWs, Mr. Speaker. Is he amenable?
Yes, Your Honor. I think mamaya po, in the period of amendments, you can propose the period of amendments, Mr. Speaker.
So thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yun lamang po. Maraming salamat.
Yes,
You're welcome.
MP, yes.
The lady from Maguindanao is
MP
recognized.
Baita Patot, we follow the MP Raisa Jajuri and MP Ambuluto and MP Adjong.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the proponent of the bill, Parliament Bill number 36, willing to answer some clarifications? Mr. Speaker.
The proponent is being asked a question.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, upon reading and rereading the proposed bill, I have noticed that while we speak of the same bill, there are so many actors of different names that are indicated in the bill. And I would like Mr. Speaker to ask the proponent what are the specific distinctions of the at least six, I saw six subject of this bill. One is overseas Bangsamoro workers. Second is Bangsamoro migrant workers. Third is overseas migrant women workers. Fourth is overseas Bangsamoro. Fifth is overseas Bangsamoro workers and their families. And sixth is Bangsamoro overseas Filipino workers. There are actually six subjects of the particular bill, which sometimes confuses me of what really is the particular subject that each of the particular section or provision of the proposed bill describes. For example, Mr. Speaker, in the definition of terms, there are only three subjects that are incorporated, meaning to say there are three other subjects that are not captured by the definition of terms. Mr. Speaker, is the proponent willing to accept later on for inclusion of another definitions of all the other three items, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I really appreciate, Mr. Speaker, if the good MP Baintan who proposed to insert of that in the definitions of terms, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My next clarification is on the matter of Article 5, which is post-deployment. It says under line 36 to 42, page 12 of the proposed bill, that there shall be sum of 10 million pesos that will be established as an emergency repatriation fund under the administration, control, and supervision of the Ministry of Labor and Employment, which will be charged against the Black Run and will be incorporated in the Bangsamoro expenditure program. Mr.
For a while, MP Baintan, is there no copy of this bill to from the secretariat? Walang copy nung bill. Na pwedeng i-post dyan.
Yeah, yung e-copy. Page 12, line 36 to line 42. Can I proceed, Mr. Speaker?
Yeah, you can proceed.
My question, Mr. Speaker, is, for example, we pegged 10 million pesos as an initial funding for this. My question, Mr. Speaker, is what is the basis of putting 10 million pesos as an initial fund?
What page is that,
Page 12.
MP?
Page 12.
Page 12. Proceed.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, my question is, first, what is the basis of putting 10 million pesos? We have it can be 5 million pesos, 1 million pesos. So what is the basis of putting 10 million pesos on initial funding? My second question, Mr. Speaker, is what is really the intention of an emergency repatriation fund? When can we access? Are there criteria set by the ministry in accessing this fund? And if we peg it at 10 million pesos, what could be the potential beneficiaries, if ever, of this fund? Because we know the magnitude of our overseas Bangsamoro workers. It might be sufficient or not sufficient, and that's why I am asking what is the basis, because if this is if this needs an increase, then we might as well recommend for its increase. But at least we should know what is the basis, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Actually, ang basis po natin dito sa repatriation, although this repatriation is a national program. So actually, meron silang budget ito from the OWA fund. So doon kinukuha ito sa trust fund ng OWA. So since we are the autonomous government, so doon sa approved structure po na, based on that, our basis, so yung ang daming mga repatriated overseas workers natin na mayroong mga problem. So nakita namin yung problem. So kung hindi namin talagang paglalabi sa national, is nahihirapan sila paano sila pauwiin. Actually, marami pang pendings na ngayon, nasa overseas, matagal na. So ilang times kami request na tulungan sila para makauwi, nagre-request sila. Minsan may direct na kumukontak sa atin na gusto na nila mag-uwi dito sa atin, but nahirapan sila. So, Mr. Jer, so that's why, doon sa structure po natin, meron tayong division under the Overseas Workers Welfare Repatriation Assistance Division to facilitate yung repatriation natin. But the expenses, Mr. Chair, so since this is a national program, then yung pondo nila is from the trust fund of the OWA. So ang natin dito is from other countries to Manila. So pwede natin mapacilitate pag-uwi din mga assistant din dun sa proponent natin sa pondo. Sir Jel. So yun po yung isang basis natin dito sa funds for the repatriation to augment the national fund of the OWA fund, Mr. Jel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a follow-up to this concern, Mr. Speaker, if I got the explanation right, the 10 million is just an augmentation to an existing national program of the OWA, and it's actually a trust fund lodged at the national level. My question, Mr. Speaker, is how much is the annual repatriation fund of OWA?
So I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, hindi ko po na yung exact figures po because depende po yan sa trust fund. Because ang budget ng OWA ay hindi po sa GAA, although merong subsidized na budget for the administration, but most of the funds of the OWA ay base doon sa mandatory membership fee na nasok po at nilagay po sa OWA Trust Fund. Actually, for information, Mr. Jed, this mandatory membership fund is a subject of our discussion in the TWG because ang demand po natin, ang request po natin sa national, yung mandatory membership fee ng lahat ng overseas workers from the Bangsamoro regions ay dapat mabigay sa atin. So ito ay subject on the TWG doon sa transfer of powers and functions of the OWA to the Bangsamoro to the Ministry of Labor and Employment. So ito ay alhamdulillah, so merong mga progresibo dito sa pag-uusap namin. At hindi pa masyado konkreto siya, but during our TWG meeting, so sa IGR body is yung statement po ni Administrator Kadak is we appreciated that. So merong positive na baka pwede natin. That's why the Ministry of Labor and Employment para meron tayong preparation, we hire a consultant to conduct a study and formulate an investment plan. Case na yung mandatory fund, membership fund ng OFW natin from the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region ay mabigay sa atin. What is important, we are ready. Because sinabi po natin sa OWA, so meron tayong quote-unquote cultural fund na dun sa investment. So ayaw po natin ng riba. Yung mga overseas natin, ito po yung pagkakaibaan. Because yung mga overseas natin, yung share nila sa OWA fund, ini-invest ng OWA sometimes against sa ating values, against sa ating Islamic beliefs. So that's why we assert our rights that dapat yung mandatory fund, mandatory membership ng ating overseas from the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region ay dapat sa atin. Then doon sa study ng ating consultant is ganun po yung kanyang recommendation. Then meron tayo ngayon investment plan that kung i-invest natin yung pondo ng overseas natin is dapat. Kasi sa kanila ito, hindi pwede gamitin sa trainings, hindi pwede gamitin sa recon. So dapat, dahil sa kanila ito, pera nila, dapat mapunta sa kanila. Hindi pwede invest sa ibang area at hindi mabalik sa kanila. So ito po yung inassert natin, yung fund nito na dapat mapunta sa Bangsamoro government.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. However, I need some clarification. Medyo naging dalawa na yung interpretation ko sa dalawang pondo na pinag-uusapan ata natin. I would like to clarify further about the nature of the emergency repatriation. Ang sanabi kanina ay it's a trust fund coming from the national government. Yung bang sinasabi nating mandatory fund, ang source ng repatriation fund or yung repatriation fund ay coming from the budget of the OWA, provided under the General Appropriations Act.
So Mr. Chair, actually ang pondo po ng OWA are there to one fund from the membership of the OWA. And second, merong subsidized na sa GAA, particularly doon sa mga PS and some administrative expenses of the administration. So yung po, but most of the fund of the OWA is from the membership of our overseas worker. So yung po yung i-invest nila. So meron silang governed by board of trustee. So because the OWA is meron silang governing body, which is the board. So headed by the Secretary of DOLE.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
May I cut
Actually,
you both?
it
May I cut you both?
complicates-
Can you? I will grant you 1 minute suspension. You meet at the middle. You ask MP Sema your question para magkaintindihan.
Thank you
So
very
that
much,
it will be
Mr.
properly
Speaker.
recorded.
Actually, maiging maintindihan din ng mga kasama natin sa Zoom, because the meat of this bill lies on this particular section, and the other section na which I'm going to discuss as my last point, Mr. Speaker. Diretsuhin ko na lang si Mr. Speaker kung pwede. Ito pang emergency repatriation fund at yung OWA. Yung OWA ba, pag pinasa natin itong batas na ito, pwede na siyang hindi mag-operate sa Bangsamoro?
So actually yan po yung kaya sinabi ko kanina, yan po yung subject of our discussion in TWG, because now merong nag-operate na OWA in the area, in the BARM. Itong OWA nito, because in the 1990 Republic Act 1954, supposedly the Oversight Committee, pag-uusapan nila sa Oversight Committee yung devolution, but unfortunately hindi po nagkaroon ng oversight meeting and discussing devolution. So ito ay nag-ooperate sila sa atin sa BARM. So that's why ngayon, since we are now in the new entity, and in accordance to the 11054, yung mandate po na binigay sa atin yung labor, employment, and occupation. So when we interpreted that mandate, so doon sa structure po natin, so yung structure po natin, nag-establish po tayo ng 3 major bureaus. One bureau for the labor relations and standard, one bureau for overseas employment promotions welfare, and one bureau for overseas workers bureau. So this bureau, itong mga bureaus ay attached agency ng national government. But kung ni-streamlining po natin yung structure natin para mapalakas po, ni-interpret po natin because in-exercise lang natin yung power natin at ni-interpret po natin yung right to self-determination, yung assertion natin for the right to self-determination. So para meron tayong power, para maprotektahan po natin ating mga overseas workers at ma-promote po natin yung employment. So that's why, kung makikita mo, merong overlapping. That's why ngayon, subject ng IGR body, itong issue nito. So meron ng progress. Nasa level na kami ng TWG. So yung counterpart na from the DOLE, the OWA, POA, so dinidiscuss namin ito. Alhamdulillah, is positive naman yung refund. There are certain issues lang ang pinaplansa namin. But in principles, inshallah, is positive naman yung funds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Actually, my interpretation and my impression about the explanation is that there could be a possibility that once we pass this law, the national assistance And the OWA's operation might terminate once we legislate this particular bill. Am I right in my impression, Mr. Speaker?
I think what I understand from the answer was that the fund of the OWA comes from the workers. So technically, there is no money that is being brought out from the coffers of the national government, except subsidies maybe. In that case, that part of the subsidy may be taken out for the assistance of the Office of the Workers Welfare Administration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, for information, Presiding Chair, is actually last Monday, nagkaroon po, kasi during our TWG, nag-create po kami ng sub-TWG for the turnover of Region 12 field office in Cotabato City, and sub-TWG for POA, and sub-TWG for OWA. So last Monday, nag-usap na po kami, meron ng coordination meeting with the Region 12 and the Ministry of Labor for the turnover of Cotabato City field office. So alhamdulillah, we agreed that the schedule of the turnover tentatively on December 8th. And all those attached agency of the DOLE national na nag-operating in Cotabato City is ito-turn over nila sa atin. So, but meron kwan doon, napag-usapan namin, it regards on the national funds of the DOLE na kung yung fund na na-approve sa GAA, nakasama yung Cotabato City and other areas sa Bangsamoro, dapat mabigay sa atin. So, yun din ang concern. Ang usapan namin, yes-cert lang yung pondo. That's yung mga pondo ng so that's
and I think
nasa subject pa rin na pag-uusapan yan.
From what I understand also is that the provisions of the BOL will still be applying. If that is a national program that the Bangsamoro government can avail, the Bangsamoro government will still avail of that.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, because in the BOL, yung mga nationally funded programs, as I expect nandiyan si MP, yung MSSD, is yung pondo from the national. So now, nakita namin during this discussion, the TWG, so nakita namin at agree din yung aming counterpart that dapat ma-download sa MOLI yung budget ng DOLE, and it's a touch agency na nag-operate yung budget na approved na para sa Bangsamoro government. So yan pa yung subject of our discussion, Mr.
Kung wala ka ng question, MP by Intan, maybe?
As I was saying, I have other concern, Mr. Speaker. I just want to clarify that because like in the MSSD and the MBHTE, those areas and the additional areas, PS, for example, teachers, health workers, and social workers, funding should be already included in our 2021 Bangsamoro Appropriations Act. That's why I am asking if the implication of passing this law is similar to what will happen, or what happened to the DepEd, or to the MBHT, to the MSSD, and MOH. So we need to clarify that because that's crucial. We might be putting a structure that later on the national program will be terminated because of our particular action. That's my clarification, Mr. Speaker. My last concern, Mr. Speaker, was on Section 28, Article 7, which talks about legal fund amounting to 5 million pesos. Basic question, Mr. Speaker, is why 5 million pesos and why not 10 million pesos? Second is, what is the real intention of this 5 million pesos?
Yes, ang intention, this standby fund for legal assistance. So, because based on the experience, Mr. Chair, so yun ang sabi ko is ang dami nating problem. So ang dami nating problem, maraming complaint sa atin. So minsan kailangan nila ng legal assistance, mga case nila. So doon po yung mapunta yung itong amount nito sa figure.
Yun lang pong basis, Mr. Speaker. Bakit 5 million? Kasi baka naman kulang yung 5 million. Para tayong mag-uusap dito, yung basis ng ating decision, if it's 5 million, there should be enough justification why we put it at 5 million. Baka naman pwede natin doblehin kung depende sa necessity. Kaya nga kailangan natin back by some reasons and justification. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You're welcome, ma'am. MP Raisa, the jury,
MP Raisa?
you are recognized.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Majority Floor Leader. If the proponent is ready to answer some questions, I will start with...
Okay, Mr. Speaker.
You may proceed.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. May I know from the proponent, if and when this law is enacted, and there are legal actions that arise from violation of rights laid out in this law, it will be the Bangsamoro government which will have jurisdiction over these legal actions, particularly the Ministry of Labor and Employment.
Yes, Sir Speaker, actually kung titignan po yung structure natin, so any legal issues po, that's why meron tayong Bangsamoro Attorney General to facilitate all those legal actions against some provisions. So in the case of this law, kung meron ka, yes, ito is exactly po.
But specifically for rights arising out of the law or when it is enacted, for example, that affects the rights of a particular overseas Bangsamoro worker, to what office in the Bangsamoro government can that aggrieved overseas Bangsamoro worker go to? Saan po siya dudulog? So, kunyari may rights po na na-violate dito, anong opisina po siya pupunta para po magkaroon ng redress yung kanyang reklamo?
Actually, meron tayong nandyan sa Bureau of Overseas Employments and Promotions Welfare. So, in the repatriation assistant division is the Overseas Workers Bureau, and also in the Bureau of Overseas Employment, there's divisions na nag-handle po ng mga complaints po.
Okay. And these offices that you mentioned are part of the Ministry of Labor and Employment?
Yes, yes po.
Okay. Let me go to Section 3. Which talks about the coverage of the law. And it says that this act applies to all overseas Bangsamoro workers and overseas Bangsamoro within or outside the Bangsamoro territory. What is contemplated in the words outside the Bangsamoro territory?
Yes, Mr. Chair. First, because in the this provision, the coverage is anchored in the provision that the Bangsamoro government can assist the Bangsamoro outside the Bangsamoro territory. And second, Mr. Chair, during our discussion, our courtesy meeting with Secretary Bello, so meron siyang, sabi niya, sa amin is, dapat meron kayong satellite office in Manila because there's so many problems na na-encounter ng ating kababayan na Muslim dito sa Metro Manila. So walang nag-a-assist sa kanila. So isang manifestation yon, Mr. Chair, that we need to include in the coverage of the operation outside the Bangsamoro people, outside the Bangsamoro territory. And other case, Mr. Chair, meron din tayo mga kababayan. Of course ngayon, meron from Davao. So instead na doon sila mag-request ng tulong sa Region 10, so dito po sila nag-request sa atin na matulungan sila na dapat makauwi sila sa Davao. So ganun po, kasi since nakita siguro nila na we are now, meron tayong Bangsamoro Autonomous Government, then part sila, Bangsamoro sila, but hindi lang nakapasok yung territory nila sa Bangsamoro Government, but yung trust, na alam nila na immediately makatulong sa kanila is tayo. So that's why we included yung operation natin outside, that's our operation outside, because yung po yung isang basis natin. So ang dami mga kapatid natin, and na-mention ko rin dito na yung issue sa Matalam, that's MP Aida Silungan is kapitbahay niya. So namatay siya sa Middle East, then napabayaan siya. So kung hindi natin sinungkit ang national, ay hindi na malaman kung ano nangyari. So nung nag-complain po sila sa atin, so tinulungan po natin sila, na-facilitate po. So alhamdulillah nakabalik sila. And the same, marami pong mga kababayan natin from outside BARM na natulungan natin na ma-facilitate makauwi sa atin. Hindi lang sa BARM po. So yung po yung naging basis natin that we must to include the coverage of the but yung major, yung assistant, meron siyang, I think doon sa implementing rules and regulation, pwede po natin i-define yun, yung mga limitation, yung assistance doon sa period of, doon sa implementing rules and regulation, Mr. Chair.
So, Mr. Chair, do I take it to mean that outside the Bangsamoro territory would cover all provinces and cities in the Philippines?
Not that siguro, because ang ating interpretation outside the Bangsamoro territory, kung titignan natin first, yung na-define sa Tripoli Agreement, that the territory of the Bangsamoro people is 13 provinces and 9 cities, that's an agreement. So we cannot deny in that part. So that's the territory of the Bangsamoro people, although in the Republic Act 11054 is not included. But we is still part of our struggle.
So the term outside the Bangsamoro territory only covers the 13 provinces and 9 cities?
So actually hindi natin specify yung outside Bangsamoro territory.
And that is my concern, Mr. Chair. Since we already enacted the administrative code, there's a structure that's provided for the Ministry of Labor and Employment. May I know how many units or branches or sub-offices will be placed in the different provinces and cities within the Bangsamoro with respect to the work of the Bureau of Employment and Promotion, Bureau of Employment, Promotion and Welfare, Overseas Welfare Bureau, and the other offices that you mentioned.
Yeah.
How many physical offices will there be exercising the functions and powers of these subunits of the MOLE?
Actually, in our approved structure, both in the transition plan and administrative code, so each bureau, so meron po tayong 3 divisions in each bureau. So then meron tayong satellite office in Zamboanga City. Then meron tayong satellite office in Manila. So yung po yung structure. Now in the approved structure natin for 2021, dito sa admin code, yung approved structure sa admin code, meron tayo mga provincial offices po. Meron po tayo sa Tawi-Tawi, meron po tayo sa Sulu, meron po tayo sa Basilan, meron po tayo sa Lanao Sur, meron po tayo sa 63 barangays and Cotabato City and Maguindanao.
And in all those areas that are component geographical units of the BARM, there will be these bureaus or just
Actually,
the provincial office. Can it exercise the powers and mandates of the bureaus?
Actually, meron supposed to be yun yung proposal natin, but the Ministry of Budget and Finance, so next streamlining po. So ang sa amin na dito, for example, yung field office po natin, so comprises of all the functions of the ministry po. So magpa-function po, inshallah. So for example, sa isang position, so multi-functional po. But nasa amin na paano po i-manage yung operation in the provincial office.
Well, that is my concern, Mr. Chair. If we say that this law, which will provide legal mandate, no, it will be mandatory for the MOLE to take jurisdiction of cases where there's violation of rights, of the rights laid down by the law. So ang takot ko po is we are saying that all Bangsamoro overseas workers will have to file their cases in the MOLE structure. So ang problema po doon, okay naman sana yon if it's really the structure also of MOLE where you will have this at least provincial or cluster of provinces where you have all these offices. Kasi otherwise, it will actually burden the overseas Bangsamoro worker who is living in, for example, Cagayan Valley, to go to Metro Manila because that's where the satellite office of MOLE is, rather than go to a structure of DOLE in the region which covers Cagayan Valley. In the meantime that we are not able to, or I'm not even sure if that's the intention, let us also look at the practicality. And as I said, this law will provide legal mandate. Mandatory po ang jurisdiction. I think we can include in the law a provision that will say that the MOLE, through its various units, subunits like the bureaus mentioned, can extend assistance to Bangsamoro living outside the Bangsamoro territory. But to say that the legal case, no, the resolution of the violation of rights should be lodged in the MOLE structure, which will not cover the whole Philippines, where the Bangsamoro may be, that may put more burden on our people rather than facilitate the redress of their issues.
Yes, I really I understand the statement and the manifestation, Sir Chair, and I really appreciate that in the period of amendments, my good friend and good MP Raisa is and proposed for the amendment. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
May I ask
to
the interpolator? In that case, there will be no conflict of jurisdiction between any prosecuting office from the national and from the MOLE.
Well, that's another matter, Mr. Chair. I think if we go beyond the territorial jurisdiction and you have structures that are already exercising these powers, we will have to talk first and dialogue and discuss the matter because we will be carving out a part of their mandates geographically.
But in your proposal, there will be no conflict.
My proposal, Mr. Chair, is to take out the word outside the Bangsamoro territory but then add a provision that the Ministry of Labor and Employment, as well as its different bureaus, shall extend assistance to residents or Bangsamoro residents or Bangsamoro who are residing outside the territory. But it will not be a mandatory jurisdiction. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, MP Ambuludto, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Kabuntalan, Maguindanao is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Brother Majority Floor Leader. My concern, Brother Mr. Speaker and Brother Minister, is basically along the line that were raised by the ministers, by Minister Raisa. But let me simply be focused on one thing. Brother Minister, how do you imagine executing the provisions on repatriation? Are we supposed to go there and repatriate our people, or are we supposed to send our fund transfer resources to the offices in Manila and then relate with the appropriate embassies? How do you execute repatriation as provided by this law?
So actually the funds, sir, a good gentleman, MP attorney, because yung satellite office po natin is wala silang fiscal autonomy. So hindi po natin ma-transfer yung pondo. But I think we can facilitate kung may mga problems.
So you expect the Ministry of Labor, Mr. Speaker, no? We expect our Ministry of Labor and Employment to perform the repatriation operation itself? Or do you simply relate with OWA National for us to assist them in the conduct of repatriation?
Actually, as matter of protocol experiences, kung merong problem, our kababayan, as for example, in Middle East, so kino-coordinate po lang natin sa OWA because our power in the foreign relations, wala po tayo noon in the batas. Very clear po in the Republic Act 1105 that we have no power in terms of the foreign relation. So what is our matter of coordination and collaborations? For example, the case, so ito yung experience namin ngayon. So kung meron mga problems, meron mga complaints, so kino-coordinate lang natin yung ating counterpart sa OWA and POA to facilitate, to repatriate yung mga victims natin. So ganun po yung natin. That's why doon sa proposed help desk po natin, so malaking bagay po na makatulong doon sa effective and efficient monitoring of our overseas workers. So, kasi hindi natin sinasabi na pinapabayaan yung ating mga kababayan. But based on the experience, hindi tayo na-inform na mayroong nangyayari. Kung hindi yung kamag-anak na na-inform sila, hindi rin alam ng national na mayroong nangyayari sa ating kababayan. So ganun po yung nagiging situation. So karamihan sa case natin, hindi from the national na nag-inform sa atin na meron kayong kababayan nangyari ito. Kung hindi yung direct family nag-coordinate sa atin at saka pamalaman ng national na merong problema ng ating mga kababayan. So ganun po yung situation.
Sige. Dalawa lang ito po. Then yung Section 31, designing a program, yung mental health program, do we already have this capacity to design, implement this kind of program?
Yes, actually, nasa batas na natin yan. Sa recruitment.
Pero meron po ba tayong capacity na mag-design and then execute ng ganitong klaseng programa?
Yes, because meron tayong Ministry of Health and meron tayong Ministry of Social Services and Development na nag-collaborate ito. For example, in the medical certification. So dito sa medical certification, in the existing procedures and policies ng PAN. So hindi pa nakaalis yung ating kababayan na mag-abroad. So malaki ng kanilang expenses. So ang kuha natin dito is dito sa medical certification, for example, ating kababayan. So ito ay isi-subsidize ng ating office yung medical certificate nila. So para matulungan sila at yung ating kababayan with our collaboration with the Ministry of Health para doon sa kanilang medical certification.
Brother Minister, yung under Section 45, compulsory insurance coverage, is this a restatement of a current policy or requirement, or are we creating a new requirement? Section 45, compulsory insurance coverage. Is this a restatement of a national policy or requirement, or is this an additional requirement, or is this an alternative requirement to the one that is currently required by...
Actually, it's a national requirements ito.
So, nirestate lang natin. Sinulat lang natin ulit. Hindi siya additional.
But merong konting kwan lang because yun sa compulsory insurance coverage, that's an requirements of existing requirements and policies of the national.
So we are expecting, because the amount, ang nakasulat po dito, the amount of such insurance and its coverage shall be determined by the Ministry of Labor and Employment based on national standard. Para bang we will be exacting another contribution?
Yes, exactly. Not restricting additional sa akin. Kung kaya natin, hindi na sila makabayad is wag na natin sila bigyan ng at mas lalo siya na nahihirapan ng ating kababayan.
Sige po. Yun, itong huli na lang po, yung Section 46, is this not a rider? How is this germane to the title and purpose of the law? Yung Overseas Bangsamoro Workers Day.
Yes, in the national, meron silang overseas.
Dito po sa batas natin.
So dito sa batas natin,
is this
so
not a rider?
upon the approval of this bill, so doon po magpan yung ating Overseas Workers Day or Overseas Bangsamoro Workers Day.
Kasi yun po, no, yung brother speaker, kailangan germane and then pertinent doon sa title yung every provisions ng batas. Pero sige lang. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Brother Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Majority Floor Leader.
We are in the Zoom, Mr. Speaker. We will first recognize MP Zia, followed by MP Nabil Tan and MP Don.
1 minute suspension.
Dapat yung nakakanina, si MP at sa kakwan, tapos na sila suspend na lang natin. Tapos na dito lahat. Sa Zoom na lang lahat.
we
4:30 pa. 4:30. So
yeah, this will be the last group of
Yes.
interpellators.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Now, whether or not matapos itong apat at 5 o'clock, we will end the session and we will also end the period of interpellation. I think all of those matters that were discussed in the committee report have been substantially been discussed by the interpellators. So, yun, hanggang 5 o'clock lang tayo. MP Zia.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will make this very, very quick. Some of the questions that I would like to ask the proponent have already been asked by the previous interpellators. Mr. Speaker, will the proponent afford me the same courtesy as to ask my clarificatory questions, Mr. Speaker?
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Part of the intention of this bill is not only to protect our overseas workers, but to ascertain a proper management of the help desk that would be deployed or that will be set up in the consular of the Philippine embassies across the world. No, that is essentially the intention of this bill, and also to effectively serve the sector that it intends to service, meaning our Bangsamoro overseas workers. My question number one, Mr. Speaker, is that since we are trying to set up a Bangsamoro help desk in the consular embassies outside of this country, Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask and to take on the earlier questions of some of the interpellators. I would like to be clarified as to the arrangement of the budgeting. No, will the proponent agree with me that since this is a locally sponsored bill, it should also be locally funded?
Sir Speaker, yun ang sabi ko kanina is during our TWG meeting, so yung Bangsamoro Health Desk, then with the administrator of POA and the DOLE. So dun sa help desk in the embassies is sa tingin nila is medyo baka mahirapan tayo because of quote-unquote yung sovereignty issue, is a political issue. So, but ang doon is mas prepared that yung Bangsamoro helpdesk natin is doon tayo mag-establish sa Polo. So, mas open sila doon at sabi nila sa akin, quote-unquote, is doable. So, yun po yung I think Attorney MP Maysara is yung sabi kanina, siya rin mismo yung nag-raise on that issue during our TWG meeting. So, with regards on the fund of the help desk, of course, ang pag-usapan naman dyan is yung administrative expenses. So, isa din yun sa naka-table namin or the discussion on that funding with the POA kung paano po magtulungan. So, ng the BARM and the POA dun sa Polo po.
So, Mr. Speaker, the proponent mentioned about the administrative cost. When you say administrative cost, does that mean that we will hire or we will employ the one that would be deployed in a certain consulate outside from the BARM, or should the POEA or the DFA, in whatever concerned agencies would be responsible, be the one to employ or to hire the person that would man the Bangsamoro desk? Because it is still unclear to me, Mr. Speaker.
Actually, in our proposed bill is tayo po yung mag-hire at the Chief Minister kung sino po yung ilagay natin nun sa health days.
So yung sa ano po, Mr. Speaker, yung sa ilalagay po natin sa help desk, does the proponent contemplate on the actual number of personnel that would be deployed? Because this would certainly Mr. Speaker, this would certainly determine the effectivity of the help desk as to the number of the personnel or the manpower that are needed to service the Bangsamoro help desk.
Actually, dito sa build po natin is since help days, so I think we can start in one personnel because itong po natin help desk to assist the polo in overseeing our overseas, specifically for the overseas workers from the Bangsamoro region.
Mr. Speaker, the proponent also mentioned earlier that the arrangement for the budgeting, there will also be a portion of the budget to ensure that there will be a Bangsamoro help desk, that the charges would also be from the national agencies. Am I correct, Mr. Speaker?
So it regards to the I said a while ago, for example, we hire one personnel, for example, in Riyadh. So of course, yung administrative cost niya, yung administrative cost is sa atin po, yung allowance and sweldo ng ating italaga na help desk officer.
So ibig sabihin po, mayroon pong arrangement with the national as to the maintenance nitong ano na ito, help desk na ito, no? Meron pong counterpart ang national agencies.
Yung sabi ko kanina is ito ay subject doon sa pag-uusap ng TWG.
So wala pa pong klaro na arrangement, Mr. Speaker.
So far, wala pa. But in our mind is on our proposal agenda, ipapasok po namin ito sa agenda. Yung
Okay.
Sa polo.
Thank you po. Kasi Mr. Speaker, my impression, Mr. Speaker, is that for the effectivity of this Bangsamoro help desk that would be set up in our consulate outside, overseas, no, outside of the country, it does not only charge as far as the budget from the Bangsamoro Appropriations Act, but it would also impact on the administrative processes of the agencies, of the consulates across the country. That's why I think it's imperative that we need to consult them and to sort out what are the arrangement that we need to put in place so that it would be effectively handled. This Bangsamoro overseas help desk, it will be effectively manned and effectively handled, Mr. Speaker, because this would definitely impact the arrangement, the administrative policy of the consulate outside of this country, Mr. Speaker. To my last question, yes. To my last question, thank you. To my last question, Mr. Speaker, is does the proponent contemplate on managing data? Because it's also important that for us to determine the number of Bangsamoro overseas workers outside of the country, we also need to at least have a clear data as to the number before they were deployed. No, would the proponent agree with me on that? To make it more easier, that before their deployment, at least we would have a sizable number or understanding as the percentage of how many are going outside of the country seeking for employment. Would the proponent agree with me on that?
Actually, during our TWG meeting, we discussed to regards to data. So we agreed to have a memorandum of agreement on the data sharing because there's a protocol. Yung mga data hindi nila basta-basta without the agreement with the POA on the data sharing because merong data sharing. So ang pag-usapan namin is magkaroon ng data sharing agreement on the data po. So we agreed on that.
Yes.
Nagsundo na po kami at magkaroon kami ng data sharing agreement po.
So is this data sharing part of the arrangement insofar as the bill, this proposed bill is concerned, or is it a separate initiative?
Dito sa bill because later po na natin na-found out that yung data sharing. So when we inquire on that issue, so that's why we agreed to come up a data sharing agreement on the data because nahirapan tayo kukuha because sila yung may control doon sa data. So that's a protocol, dapat magkaroon ng data sharing para doon sa responsibilidad doon sa confidentiality of the data.
So ibig sabihin, Mr. Speaker, wala pa pong arrangement when it comes to the data of this of the workers before they were deployed outside, no? Do you think that there's a need, Mr. Speaker? Do you think that there's a need for the BARM to have at least an arrangement or a mechanism to regulate also the recruitment agency, because this is in a way a process by which we can ascertain the number of Bangsamoro workers to be deployed outside, insofar as the recruitment agencies and the number of the Bangsamoro workers moving outside of this country. Ultimately, this would be also germane to the idea that their rights must be protected outside. Would the proponent agree with me, Mr. Speaker, that part of the intention of the bill is also to make sure that before they were deployed, depart this country, the Bangsamoro have to have at least a sizable understanding as to the number of the Bangsamoro workers seeking employment abroad?
So I appreciate Mr. Presiding Chair, if the good MP adjunct can propose an amendment to insert on that provisions in our bill. I really appreciate Mr. MP adjunct kung with our amendments you can propose for the insertions of that statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For my last manifestation, I still, Mr. Speaker, I would still argue and insist that it's imperative, Mr. Speaker, that we have a clear understanding with the national agencies, because they are directly affected once we enact this law, meaning DOJ, the DOF, the POA, and the OWA. Because even if this is a regional law, ultimately the impact of this would still be changes in how the consulate would go on with their processes or the policy insofar as protecting the Filipino overseas workers. Because as far as the national agencies are concerned, they would still be considered as Filipino overseas workers. But then again, I would support the intention of this bill, and I congratulate the proponent for coming up with this kind of legislation. But I would still insist that there has to be a clear-cut understanding and arrangement with regards to our counterpart national agencies, because ultimately we cannot avoid them, and ultimately they will be the one to represent the country outside. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the proponent for accommodating my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, MP John.
MP Liza Lamia.
MP who?
The Minority Floor Leader. Attorney Liza Lamia.
Am I recognized, Mr. Speaker?
The Minority Floor Leader is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. To the proponent, I am with you with respect to this law that you have, this bill that you have drafted for the protection of our overseas Bangsamoro workers. My question pertains to substantial provisions, penal provisions of the bill, and which might get into conflict later on. So let me lay the predicate first, Mr. Speaker, with respect to statutory construction. Can we check Section 23 of the bill, Mr. Speaker? Can we show that, please? Section 23 on illegal recruitment, page 8.
Please point us to page 8.
Section 20. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this particular provision, Section 23, provides that illegal recruitment for purposes of this act, which pertains to the bill itself, and defines what illegal recruitment is. If you go down, can we go down? You will find a listing of all the offenses that are penalized under this bill, including the elements, no? So nandyan na pati yung elements. If you go further down, can we go to the almost the last paragraph of the penal provisions? It provides that sige pa po, how the illegal recruitment is done. And then there's also a provision on the penalties. Can we go to the penalties, please? Just go down, scroll down. So it imposes penalties, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the proponent if the penalties that are imposed here are similar to what is found in the national law. That means I'm talking about RA number 8042 as amended, which provides penalties. I would like the proponent first to answer, Mr. Speaker. Are these the same offenses that are penalized under RA 8042 as amended, and do these provisions contain the same penalties as provided under RA 8042 as amended?
Yes, thank you, Honorable Minority Floor Leaders. That's tama po yun. Exactly, this provision na penalties is the same with the national policies, because we agreed that the implementations of the policies is yung uniformity of implementations of the national policies with regards on this provision, because both the Ministry of Labor and Employment and the DOLE, the Department of Labor and Employment, our mandate is anchored on the labor code, the Philippine labor code. So pending the creations of the Bangsamoro government on the Bangsamoro labor code, because we are intent to draft the Bangsamoro labor code. In fact, meron na kaming understanding with the national, the DOLE Central Office, that since wala pa tayong Bangsamoro labor code, so yung implementation dapat uniform yung implementation po.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Proponent. Considering this, I'm looking at a situation. This takes off from the questions earlier by MP Raisa Jujuri with respect to the implementation or execution of this law. In my case, I'm looking at a situation where someone who has violated this law within the BARM is found guilty after final conviction of illegal recruitment later on. How will the regular court interpret the law? Which law will be used to prosecute the case? Will it be this law, or will it be the national law? And to avoid that, Mr. Speaker, one of the rules under statutory construction, if the proponent would agree, for laws that are being drafted, is that if the provisions are essentially the same, and if these are penalty provisions, and under the law, penalty provisions should be strictly construed. So if the provisions are essentially the same compared to RA, the national law, which is RA 8042, as amended, with respect to the crimes or violations and with respect to the penalties, wouldn't it be better if this is worded in such a way that there is an express reference to a national penal law to be incorporated in the law, in this particular bill, and expressly also, within that bill, it is also expressly provided that any amendment, the national amendment of the national law, will also automatically amend the law that we're going to pass. Ibig sabihin, kapag may amendment doon, let's say pinataas nila yung number of years, no, sa imprisonment, pinataas din yung amount, yung fine na dapat na babayaran. Or instead of life imprisonment, later on, what if meron ng death penalty? How will this affect our regional law? So I would be proposing later on, Mr. Speaker, if the proponent would agree that we could couch these penal provisions in a language that's not going to go against the national penal laws, because these are penalties, Mr. Speaker. Would the proponent agree to this?
Yes, 100% minority. I agreed to, if you can recommend during the amendment to propose that to insert that provision. The provision is I really appreciate MP minority provider. So you're most welcome po during the period of amendment.
Thank
Because
you. Yes.
May I interrupt you both here? I think you should look at also at the limit of the parliament in crafting penal laws. There are limitations stated in Republic Act 11054. I think you should look at it also. And I think you should also look at it in the concept of mala in se and mala prohibita. We can treat our own laws as ordinances, in which case it could be governed by the principles of mala prohibita, that it can operate on its own, notwithstanding the presence of a national law that could be similar or closely similar to that penal provision. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I may be allowed, that goes without saying, Mr. Speaker. Yes, when we craft a penal law at the regional level, we need to take into consideration of the limits of the penalties that we can provide. Given that, Mr. Speaker, I would be recommending some amendments to these provisions so that later on, the courts who will be interpreting our laws, in the regular courts will be interpreting our laws when there is a prosecution of cases for violation of the national law on migrant workers and our regional law on overseas Bangsamoro workers, will not have difficulty and would be able to clearly, the DOJ would be able to clearly establish the elements of the crimes that have been committed, and the court will be able to clearly issue the decision, the judgment that would penalize the accused. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Proponent.
Welcome, ma'am. Majority
The last is MP Don Loong, Mr. Speaker.
MP Don Loong is recognized. We will not end the period of interpellation today. There are still who have texted me and PM me that they will continue to interpellate.
Thank you,
MP
Mr.
Don Loong is
Speaker.
recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I start, Mr. Speaker, with the issue on registration? Can the proponent just clarify that if a recruiter is already registered in the national agency, do they need to make an additional registration with MOLE?
Actually, in our approved bill, the Recruitment Agency Act of 2020 is very clear that first, those recruitment to regulate the recruitment agency, both the international and local, so dapat mag-register po sila sa atin. So those recruitment agencies already have their license in the Department of Labor and Employment or POA. So hindi na po sila, but mag-register po at magpa-accredit lang po sa Ministry of Labor and Employment through the Bureau of Employment and Bureau of Overseas Employment and Promotions before mag-operate po sila in the Bangsamoro region. So, but those yung bagong yung mag-establish pa lang ng recruitment agency from the Bangsamoro government, so required po sila na mag-register po sila sa Ministry of Labor and Employment po.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My next question, Mr. Speaker, is to support the point raised by MP by Intan a while ago, that we must make sure that the regional law that we are doing will not prevent the Bangsamoro worker from being, will not deprive the Bangsamoro worker from national programs. For example, there are national programs by OWA that for COVID, there are Balik Probinsya, OFW Kalinga, Hatid Sundo. I want to understand it clearly that while we will pass this law, it will not deprive our Bangsamoro workers of access to national government programs because they are Bangsamoro workers.
So kung tignan natin dyan sa miscellaneous provision sa section 47, yung reservations of rights. So nandiyan po siya, yung rights and benefits nila from the overseas workers granted under RA number 8042 as amended other laws, orders and rights and regulations of the migrant workers. So very clear in the miscellaneous po. So yung mga benefits po nila from the national is dapat makukuha pa rin nila.
Thank you for that, Mr. Speaker. Under Article 35, Mr. Speaker, under prohibition on officials and employees, it states that it shall be unlawful for any official or employee of the Ministry of Labor and Employment or other Bangsamoro government agencies involved in the implementation of this act. Mr. Speaker, may I ask specifically, could we mention who do we refer to here as the other Bangsamoro government agencies? Just to be clear, because their relatives up to fourth degree are not allowed to go into the business of recruiting, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, very clear in the provisions. First, yung employees of the Ministry of Labor and Employment. So dito sa other agencies, of course, in other agencies in the Bangsamoro government. So dapat po is hindi po sila part of, for example, specifically in the due respect on the MOH, so because part sila dito sa itong bill nito. So doon sa medical education and MSSD, because part din sila doon sa distress facilitate nila. So yun po, then kasi so yun po yung i-avoid natin at of course yun po yung prohibited doon sa mag-engage po ng recruitment agency po.
Mr. Speaker, would it be possible to, since we already know the other Bangsamoro government agencies, to just list them down here in section 35?
Okay, so I think I request the Honorable MP Long that during the period of mentions, you can propose that in the provisions, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My other question on jurisdiction was already asked by Attorney Liza and Attorney Raisa. But just to further clarify my my worry, Mr. Speaker, this law, when we say Bangsamoro overseas worker, even if he is working in Baguio, he is referred to as a Bangsamoro overseas worker, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, ang definition po natin sa Bangsamoro is based on the Republic Act 11054, yung definition ng Bangsamoro.
Yes, so...
Can you repeat your question? Medyo confusing yun. Baguio?
Baguio. For example, I'm actually, this refers to the Bicobar, to the Bangsamoro communities outside the Bangsamoro. So these are overseas workers that are outside already of the Bangsamoro region. So they're still considered part of the Bangsamoro overseas workers. Is that correct, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
So, Mr. Speaker, as regards the penal provisions of this law, if they belong, for example, to Luzon, for example, in Baguio, where will the cases be filed, Mr. Speaker? Who has primary jurisdiction over the Bangsamoro overseas workers residing in Baguio or in Ilocos Norte?
So dun sa statement po ng ating Assistant Majority Pro Leader po is yun po ang request natin during the amendment, period of amendments. So pwede po mag-propose ng amendment regard on that matter.
Okay, that's all my questions, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Because it's already 5 p.m. in the afternoon. We will continue this tomorrow, Mr. Speaker. Yes.
Madjo and my good presiding chair, the Committee on Labor and Employment will humbly request that since this bill is thoroughly discussed in the period of interpretations, I think almost all the provisions already clear. So I request, we humbly request presiding chair, my majority leader, to close these interpretations. Then maybe tomorrow we can proceed in the period of amendment because tomorrow is marami po tayong major agenda, Mr. Chairman. We appeal to this August body, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Majority Leader, to close this interpretation because we already substantially discussed the issue, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I think the tentative order for as of this moment is to defer the period of interpellation until tomorrow. We will have to talk to those who have signified to interpellate, and maybe we will look at it how to accommodate everybody so that we will come up with a better.
Yes, Mr. Presiding Chair, I believe that all those provisions is substantially discussed. So if you discuss and discuss, it's fine. So I believe, Mr. Speaker, I'm appealing. I'm appealing to close this period of interpretations, and tomorrow we can proceed in the period of amendments, Mr. Speaker. I am appealing to the good honorable bodies to close this period, substantially discuss the issue. So ano pang kailangan natin i-discuss dito? So kung merong mga amendments, we can amend. We can propose an amendments. So I think wala na tayong dapat pag-usapan dito. Because the more to prolong the issue, so gusto natin ito matapos natin. Why we prolong? This bill is 2019 pa namin ito, Nikwan. I'm humbly requesting Mr. Speaker to close this period of interpretation. Thank you.
The temporary order of these things right now is that we defer the period of interpellation until tomorrow.
Yes. I move for the suspension of this session, Mr. Speaker, until tomorrow afternoon.
This is just a suspension?
Yes, suspension, yes. We will continue tomorrow.
Session suspended until tomorrow at 1 o'clock in the afternoon.